John was about 11 years old. Normal kid, went to school, had a good life, had friends. What he didn't know was that his mom would gather with her friends on Friday nights, and they would have sessions where they would attempt to communicate with the other side. They would hold seances. They had various articles they would use for communication, old books, different spells and chants. So one day, John was home from school, and he went about his business, did his homework, finished up, went out, played with his friends for a while. And then his mom had told him that, as it was usual every Friday night, that he would have to go to bed by 9 o'clock. So of course by 9 o'clock he got ready and went to sleep. Now during the night, he said he awoke several times with certain noises. He couldn't really explain. It didn't sound like something he had heard before. There were kind of strange sounds, he says. He says it didn't sound like my mom or anybody I knew. He said that they were kind of voices, but they were very amplified, I guess is the word I'm looking for. They were very high-pitched. So he thought he was dreaming, so he went back to sleep. But then at one point, he got up, walked towards his bedroom door, and he could hear his mom talking. And he slowly turned the door handle, very slowly as to not make any noise and alert his mother. So he turns the handle and he opens the door ever so slightly. And he takes a look out, and he can see down at the end of the hall, he could see his mom's shadow. Up against the wall, there was some candles that were lit, and he can hear 3 other people talking, 3 females. And then suddenly one of the females started to hyperventilate. So he got scared and he closed the door and he went back to bed. And then suddenly there was a big commotion. And then his mom started yelling. So naturally he got up out of his bed, opened the door, and as he starts making his way down the hallway, his mom sees him and comes running over and stops him and says, "No, back into your room. Don't come out of your room now." So inside he goes, he closes the door. He's wondering what is going on. He can smell a freshly struck match, like sulfur dioxide. He says it was very strong. He says he heard the women still sounded like they were arguing. The lady that had had the hyperventilating episode looks like, or sounds like rather, she had calmed down. So he couldn't go to sleep, and he stayed up pretty much the whole night. And when the sun came up, he went towards the door, opened it very slowly. He looked around. All the doors were closed in the hallway where all the bedrooms were. So he very quietly walked over to his mom's bedroom door. And he put his ear to the door, and he could hear his parents asleep. He opened the door very quietly, took a quick peek, and he saw both his parents sound asleep. So he closed the door and ever so carefully walked down the hall. As he's walking down the hall, he sees part of the room is kind of bright. So he walks a little further, and as he's turning the corner, he turns to his left, and there's a man standing there, a man on fire. He saw him and quickly ran underneath the kitchen table. He said, I looked up and I could see this man standing there, and he was engulfed in flames. All this energy around him, sparks everywhere and flames. He says, I had never seen anything like that. He says, I was sure it was the devil. You know, all these stories growing up in a very religious household, you always heard of the devil associated with fire and the color red. Well, the man that stood there in the kitchen was engulfed in red flames. He says, I couldn't move. He says, I held my breath, my chest, my heart was pounding. He says, I didn't want to bring any attention to me. I wanted to yell out for my mom, but I couldn't speak. My eyes were fixated on this man on fire. So as I slowly shifted over to the side, I thought maybe, just maybe, I could get enough room that I could run past him and run out of the house. It was either that or run the opposite way. So as I start to come out from underneath the kitchen table, suddenly he turns over and he sets his eyes on me. We both stare at each other. I wanted to yell and I couldn't. It was as if my mouth was taped. I felt like I had no tongue. I couldn't speak. He just stood there, and I could see the flames just dancing around him. But he wasn't burnt. He wasn't in pain. He wasn't yelling. He was just the man on fire. He walks towards me, and I grab the kitchen table leg, and I'm fearing that he's going to get a hold of me. Suddenly he stopped, and I heard down from the other end of the hall my mom. She was calling for me, but I couldn't yell for her. And then I started hearing her come down the hall, and suddenly the man of fire just backed up and suddenly vanished into thin air. My mother came around the corner and said, has someone been smoking in here? What's that smell? And I started to shake, and when I started to shake, she saw my hand underneath the kitchen table, and she reached down and grabbed me and said, what's wrong? And I kept pointing towards the corner. She looked at me, she goes, what did you see? And I couldn't speak. So she picked me up and started hugging me and started rubbing my back to see if I would, answer, if I would say something. And finally, like as if I came out of some spell of some sort, and I started talking, he says, Ma, I just saw this man, he was on fire. I said, red flames everywhere and sparks, and I said, it was so scary. And she said, where did he go? And I pointed towards the corner of the kitchen. I said, he just disappeared over there. And my mom put me back down, he says, and she looked around. She says, go back into your room and don't come out until I tell you. So I went back to my room really quick. I got into my bed and put the covers over me. And I can hear my mom down the hall speaking in Latin. I knew it was Latin because I had heard it before, and I had heard her speak that with her friends. And then her voice started to get a little bit louder and louder. By then I figured I had an older brother. Hopefully he would wake up and get involved in this, and my dad too, but no one was answering, no one was responding to anything. It was like as if time was frozen there for a bit. So I got up again and I opened the door, and I could hear my mom, and she was speaking louder and louder. And I could see that she was standing off to the right side, and from my area, from where I was standing, I could partially see her a bit. She had an old book in her hand, and she was getting a little bit louder and louder. And then all of a sudden she started screaming and the book fell out of her hand. So I ran towards her, and as I ran towards her, the whole kitchen lit up in a red flare. And this man materialized again right in front of us. And my mom started to freak out, and then she grabbed a handful of what looked like salt or a white powdered substance and started throwing it on the floor around in front of us. And this man slowly made his way towards us. And you could smell that smell, like I said, like burning matches. I wanted to go and run down the hall and grab my dad, but I couldn't move. I was just frozen in fear. So I grabbed onto my mom's hand. Suddenly, the man on fire started to get bigger and bigger, and he got larger and larger, started expanding. The whole kitchen now was all engulfed in this red fire, but nothing was getting burned. You could smell a burning smell, but physically nothing was getting burned. So I looked at my mom, and my mom says, "Go back into your room," and I kept saying with my head, "No, I can't," but I couldn't speak. And then she quickly grabbed another book that was off to the side. She started chanting something in a different language I don't even understand. Suddenly the man on fire started to retreat, and the flames started getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And then all of a sudden, in the blink of an eye, he just vanished into the ground.